Okay, let's just think about this for a second. How exactly did a landmass that was, for all intents and purposes, completely ignored by early explorers transform into a global superpower? And not over millennia, but in just a few short centuries. Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to dive deep into the incredibly fascinating and, frankly, super complex odyssey of the United States. It's a massive tapestry, right? We're talking ancient indigenous civilizations, the arrival of European colonists, a really firing revolution, insanely rapid territorial expansion, and a devastating civil conflict. And all of that somehow leads to this unprecedented era of industrial growth and global influence. So we are going to unpack the whole shebang. We'll look at how a nation born from just 13 disparate, arguing colonies managed to evolve into a massive global leader in technology, finance, and culture.
To help us digest this massive journey, we've got a clear roadmap today. First, the unexpected new world. Second, the fight for independence. Third, expanding from sea to sea. Fourth, civil war and reconstruction. And finally, the rise of a superpower. Let's get into it.
So we really have to start by asking this fundamental question. How did an ignored piece of land become a superpower? Because, it's actually really easy to forget that early European explorers, like the Spanish, they completely bypassed North America for nearly an entire century. Think about it. When Christopher Columbus stumbled upon the Americas back in 1492 while he was looking for a trade route to Asia, he found islands in the Caribbean, and right after that, Spain and Portugal basically just carved up the map. They focused all their empire-building energy down south on areas that were just bursting with gold, silver, and really dense populations. So for a long, long time, the massive landmass up north, it was deemed pretty uninteresting. They basically ignored it. It wasn't until much later that this seemingly overlooked territory would set the stage for a dramatic shift in global power.
Starting with Section 1, The Unexpected New World, From Ancient Roots to Jamestown.
Long before Columbus stumbled into the Caribbean and mistakenly thought, hey, I've hit India, there were already millions of indigenous people living right here. And we're talking about incredibly diverse cultures. These communities, including the ancestors of modern tribes like the Cherokee, the Navajo, and the Sioux, they didn't just exist, they flourished. They had developed highly complex societies. We're talking sophisticated governments, really intricate agricultural systems, and massive trade networks that literally spanned the entire continent. But then, in 1607, everything changed. After the mysterious and still kind of spooky disappearance of their very first colony at Roanoke, the English successfully established Jamestown. And soon after that, the Pilgrims arrived in Plymouth. This sparked a massive wave of European settlement all along the East Coast. Now, this brought new technologies and economic systems, sure, but we also have to recognize it tragically introduced diseases like smallpox, and it sparked violent conflicts that absolutely devastated those thriving indigenous populations.
Moving on to Section 2, The Fight for Independence. Breaking away from the crown.
Now, the lead up to independence was literally a classic domino effect. Think about it like a giant financial hangover. After the 7 Years' War, Britain was absolutely drowning in debt. To pay it off, they forced the cost onto the colonies and inadvertently triggered the American Revolution. You see, by this point, the colonies had grown to over 1 million people. When the British fought the French and Indian War, which was just the North American part of that larger 7 Years' War, they successfully secured the territory. But it came at a massive, massive financial cost. To recover all that money, the British Parliament started passing a series of highly unpopular laws. You might remember these from history class: the Sugar Act of 1764, the Stamp Act of 1765, laws that heavily taxed everyday items. Furthermore, they passed things like the Navigation Act, which restricted American trade solely to British ships and markets. The message was clear: the colonies existed primarily just to enrich the British homeland.
No taxation without representation. We've all heard it, right? This became the absolute rallying cry for colonists who flat out refused to pay British taxes without having a voice in Parliament. Because, the American society that had developed over there was actually incredibly unique. It was highly progressive for its time. They focused on merit and economic progress rather than, say, a strict European-style aristocracy. You had universities like Harvard and William and Mary spreading rational thought and scientific thinking. It was an intellectual boom. So when the British tried to just impose arbitrary taxes from across an ocean, intellectual leaders and organizations like the Sons of Liberty aggressively pushed back. And the tension just skyrocketed. You had events like the Boston Massacre, where British soldiers fired into a crowd. Then the Boston Tea Party, where protesters literally dumped heavily taxed British tea straight into the harbor. It all escalated until finally, the colonies officially adopted the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776.
But here's the thing, winning a grueling war of independence, which, by the way, they only won with the crucial help of France and Spain, was only half the battle. Because right after the war, the Americans realized their initial attempt at a government was kind of a complete mess. The 13 colonies had basically become 13 separate, independent countries that were united in name only. It wasn't working. Recognizing that the whole nation was failing fast, delegates gathered in 1787 to draft the United States Constitution. And this document, it was revolutionary. It created a modern nation-state blueprint, establishing a strong federal republic with 3 distinct branches: a president, a Congress, and a Supreme Court. Plus, it guaranteed fundamental freedoms like speech and religion through the Bill of Rights. It was a framework so robust, so groundbreaking, that it actually still governs the country today.
Which brings us to Section 3, expanding from sea to sea, the push westward.
Think about this number for a second. $15 million. I mean, in the grand scheme of real estate, that is incredibly, mind-bogglingly cheap. But that is the exact price America paid to Napoleon for the Louisiana Purchase in 1803. And with one signature, it instantly doubled the size of the entire country. The funny thing is, at the time, Americans really just wanted to buy the port of New Orleans so they could secure the Mississippi River for trade. That was it. However, over in Europe, Napoleon Bonaparte was gearing up for a massive, very expensive war with Britain. He needed cash fast, and he feared an American alliance with the British. So he totally shocked the American diplomats by offering to sell the entire Louisiana territory for just $15 million. It was an astonishing stroke of geographic luck, and it perfectly accommodated a rapidly growing American population that was basically doubling every 20 years.
Now, fueled by this booming population and a concept called manifest destiny, which was this widespread belief that Americans were literally destined by Providence to span the entire continent, settlers just poured westward. They were looking for free farmland, they were looking for gold, they were looking for a new life. And the speed of this expansion was staggering. In just about 50 years, the U.S. acquired Florida from Spain, they annexed the Republic of Texas, they split the vast Oregon Territory with Britain, and they won massive western territories following a war with Mexico. Oh, and here's a wild historical fact for you. The U.S. even passed something called the Guano Islands Act, which actually allowed citizens to claim unoccupied islands covered in bird droppings just to use for fertilizer. I know, crazy, right? But we have to talk about the flip side. This relentless, aggressive expansion came at a devastating cost to indigenous populations. Native American tribes were continually forced from their ancestral lands through brutal policies like the Indian Removal Act. It's a sobering reality of this era of growth.
This brings us to a massive turning point. Section 4, Civil War and Reconstruction, a nation divided.
While the country was expanding outward, a massive crisis was brewing inward. If we compare the two halves of the country, the stark contrast is impossible to ignore. The North and the South had completely incompatible economic and moral structures. Up in the North, slavery had been outlawed. Their economy was rapidly shifting. It was all about factories, manufacturing, and fast-paced industrialization. But down in the South, it was a totally different world. The entire economic engine was built on large-scale agriculture, specifically cotton, which relied heavily, entirely really, on the forced labor of enslaved African people. Now, for decades, politicians from both sides debated, they argued, they tried to make compromises. But ultimately, the moral and economic divide was just simply too profound to bridge.
The breaking point finally arrived when Abraham Lincoln won the presidency in 1860. Southern states, deeply fearing that he was going to abolish slavery, decided to secede and form the Confederate States of America. What followed was, without a doubt, the deadliest conflict in American history. Over 4 bloody, brutal years, the nation literally tore itself apart. The Union ultimately emerged victorious in 1865, fundamentally shifting the course of the entire country forever. The immediate aftermath brought the 13th Amendment, legally abolishing the institution of slavery once and for all. It also launched a critical, highly complex period known as Reconstruction. The goal was to rebuild the shattered South and integrate formerly enslaved people into society as free citizens. And while constitutional amendments did grant citizenship and voting rights on paper, the everyday struggle against discrimination and for true racial equality, well, that would continue for generations. In fact, the echoes of this entire era are still actively being navigated in modern America today.
Finally, we reach Section 5, Rise of a Superpower, the Modern Era.
The 20th century for the United States was, honestly, an absolute roller coaster of extremes. It was defined by just massive, unstoppable momentum. Even before World War I, America started flexing its geopolitical muscles. They purchased Alaska, they annexed Hawaii, and they opened the Panama Canal in 1914, which is a huge deal because it allowed their increasingly powerful navy to move seamlessly between oceans.
Then, when the World Wars broke out, America leveraged its unbelievable industrial base to basically become the arsenal of democracy. But it wasn't all just military might and victories. Surviving the crushing economic despair of the Great Depression in the 1930s really proved the nation's internal resilience. And then, following their victory in World War II, the United States found itself locked in a tense, decades-long Cold War with the Soviet Union. And this rivalry was so intense, it pushed technological boundaries so fast that by 1969, American boots were literally walking on the moon.
Now, when you really stop and think about it, it is absolutely remarkable, almost unbelievable, that a system designed for 13 agrarian colonies way back in 1787 still successfully governs a modern, high-tech superpower today. The balance of power between the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches continues to be the beating engine of American democracy. This very same constitutional framework is what they use to navigate today's wildly complex domestic debates over things the founders couldn't have even imagined, like artificial intelligence, modern healthcare, and civil rights. And it does all that while simultaneously managing incredibly delicate international relations and nuclear policy. It's a real testament to the durability of that original design.
So, what does the modern United States look like today? Geographically, it's the third largest country on Earth. We're talking about incredibly varied landscapes, stretching all the way from the depths of the Grand Canyon to the snowy peaks of Denali. Demographically, it is home to over 340 million people representing almost every single nation on the globe. That makes it one of the most culturally diverse places in all of human history. Economically, it houses the world's leading technology, finance, and healthcare industries. Whether you're looking at the cutting-edge artificial intelligence being developed out in Silicon Valley, the pop music and blockbuster films constantly exported by Hollywood, or the groundbreaking research happening at institutions like MIT and Stanford, the nation's footprint on global culture and science is absolutely undeniable. Which naturally leads us to look ahead.
We've traced an extraordinary journey today, from ancient indigenous societies and early European settlements straight through the fiery crucible of revolution and civil war, all the way to the pinnacle of global technological and military influence. The story of the United States is, at its core, a story of constant, relentless transformation. Today, they face entirely new challenges: a digital revolution, global pandemics, and the ongoing, deeply important quests for social justice. The American Odyssey continues. So I'll leave you with this question to chew on. How will a nation born from 13 divided colonies adapt to the immense complexities of the 21st century? Whatever happens, it will undoubtedly shape the future of the entire globe. Thank you so much for exploring this history with me today. Keep learning and stay curious.